Greetings everyone. This is a quick promo before the video begins. If you're new to the channel and you didn't know it yet, I am actually an author in addition to being a YouTuber, and I have 2 books that you can get on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1 and The Occult Mafia. The first is sort of a bizarre, absurdist kaiju anime mashup, and the other is a horror noir story with a hint of a western thrown in there. They're both set in the same universe, and at this point have received mostly positive reviews, so you might want to check them out. I've provided Amazon links for both of them down in the description. They're both available in either paperback or Amazon Kindle, and Operation Red Dragon is also available in audiobook form. So if either of these strike your fancy and you want to support a struggling artist, feel free to go down and check out either one or both of them. Alright, the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, we can get on with the video. Thank you all for your support. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and this may come as a shock to absolutely none of you, but I'm a huge fan of Animaniacs. I loved it as a kid, and I still love it to this day.
Odds are that most of you do as well, and who can blame you? This show was hilarious, clever, and had just the right mix of sophisticated and stupid. Everything about it just worked, plain and simple.
Of course, a large part of what made it work so well was its variety.
Rather than focus exclusively on a single core group in a single setting, Animaniacs had a multitude of different characters who could be inserted into any environment the writers wanted, not to mention they could be mixed and matched in various ways.
With such an eclectic cast of screwballs and weirdos, it was inevitable that some would become more popular than others.
Such was the case with Pinky and the Brain, that wonderful pair of lab mice trying to take over the world. In fact, they were so popular that Warner Brothers decided to give them their own series.
Now, as anyone who's followed a TV franchise can tell you, spin-offs are a risky move. Popular characters may be best taken in small doses, and devoting more time to them could lead to them overstaying their welcome. Fortunately, that was not the case with Pinky and the Brain.
You could attribute that to how the show was given a primetime slot, meaning it was granted a bit more freedom to include different brands of humor, including the slightly more mature variety. Mostly though, you can chalk it up to how the 2 title characters had such amazing chemistry.
And the rest, as they say, is history. It was a huge hit, and I'm sure we're all glad that it was.
Recently, however, I've been wondering if any of the other Animaniacs characters could have carried their own series. Which ones would have worked, and which would have tanked?
I say it's time we find out. Let's go through the remaining characters and see which ones could, and maybe even should, have gotten their own spin-off series.
I'll be skipping over the Warner siblings because Animaniacs was always their show, so spinning them off would make no sense. I'm also ignoring the short sketches like Mime Time, The Randy Beeman Kid, and Good Idea, Bad Idea because stretching them to a half hour would have been impossible anyway.
With those boundaries set, let's start with the obvious choice.
Slappy Squirrel. A cartoon star from the Golden Age, Slappy Squirrel is now old and semi-retired from the entertainment business, but that doesn't mean she ever stopped doing what she does best. Sketches with Slappy often feature her spilling secrets about her fellow toons, outwitting old rivals determined to best her before they kick the bucket, using her old school methods against clueless modern types, and of course, teaching her nephew Skippy the ways of true cartoon chaos.
It's long been suspected that Slappy and Skippy were always the studio's next choice for a spin-off series. In fact, they even got a whole half-hour episode which, despite claims to the contrary, kinda feels like it was a backdoor pilot. We'll get to that episode in a minute, but first let's answer the question of whether or not a Slappy and Skippy Squirrel spin-off could have succeeded. Points for alliteration, I guess. Anyway, to answer the question, in a word, yes.
Slappy had proven time and time again that she was every bit as versatile and iconic as the Warners and the Mice, and the concept, an old Hollywood starlet with a crazy past and a crazier lifestyle teaching her nephew the ropes, was a unique idea that made for great television.
So how come it never happened? Well, it might have had something to do with that aforementioned full-length episode.
You see, the episode in question, One Flew Over the Cuckoo Clock, featured Slappy basically developing dementia. Like, real dementia, and Skippy being run ragged trying to take care of her. Things escalate when Slappy must be committed to a nursing home, and people from Child Services come to take custody of Skippy since his aunt is no longer fit to care for him. As Animaniacs episodes go, it was surprisingly dramatic.
The episode isn't bad, mind you, but it gets way too real.
Sure, we're used to cartoons tackling these subjects today, but back then, this episode was too much too suddenly. Whether it was the intention or not, the ratings weren't good enough to justify a spin-off, which is too bad because it could have worked.
That's the way life goes sometimes. Anyway, who's next?
Goodfeathers. Of all the characters on Animaniacs, the Goodfeathers are probably the most unusual addition, due to the fact that it's based on Goodfellas. You see, it's rare for an all-ages cartoon to devote an entire concept to parodying an R-rated gangster movie, and do it with pigeons, no less.
Kids aren't going to get that. They haven't seen Goodfellas. Or at least, they shouldn't have.
Surprisingly though, this trio of tough guy pigeons, Bobby, Pesto, and Squit respectively, proved every bit as versatile as the other characters.
So could a series with them as the stars have worked? Well, maybe.
You see, in order for Goodfeathers to have worked as a series, it would have needed to embrace the fact that it was based on an R-rated gangster movie and gone a bit edgier than Animaniacs, or even Pinky and the Brain. And I don't know if the world was ready for that in the 90s.
Sure, South Park also premiered in this decade, but it was never part of a kids' show the way Goodfeathers was.
Even then, however, it might not have worked in the long run. I can take the Goodfeathers in small doses, but I have no idea if I could take a full half hour of them before the jokes get stale.
Still, I believe they stood a better chance than most. Who's next on the list?
Rita and Runt. The premise of this segment is perhaps the easiest to describe. A couple of stray pets travel the world looking for a new home. From there, they can wind up anywhere at any point in history. This, of course, does not even begin to get into the complexities of this unlikely duo, comprised of a smart, prideful, yet lonely cat and a dim-witted, perpetually happy, loyal-to-the-end dog.
What really set the Rita and Runt segments apart, however, was the fact that they were basically mini musicals.
Oh sure, music and singing popped up everywhere on the show, but it was the driving force of these segments. More importantly, these cartoons were consistently more dramatic, when compared to the rest of the series at least.
I gotta say, I have a greater appreciation for these segments as an adult than I did as a kid, because I now understand the theatrical influences that went into making them. Really is kind of a shame they eventually phased them out of the show.
So could a spin-off have worked? Well, if it did happen, they probably could have afforded to keep Bernadette Peters as the voice of Rita, and they would have had more room to expand on the musical concept.
However, I'm not sure it would have been very practical.
You see, it would have required multiple new songs relevant to advancing the plot to be written for every single episode, and that is not easy for even the most prolific of songwriters to do. Had they tried, the show might have lost steam quickly. Remember, not every episode of Animaniacs has songs in it, and not every song is plot relevant.
So a Rita and Runt series would have been an interesting experiment, especially since it would have been more dramatic than your average 90s cartoon, but I doubt it would have lasted very long. Still, that's better than I can say for our next batch of characters.
Buttons and Mindy. Oh boy. I'm sure this idea looked good on paper. A pastiche of Lassie where the dog gets put through the ringer trying to protect a child who natural selection seems to have a personal grudge against.
In execution, though, I never found the Mindy and Buttons segments to be funny. I just found them to be mean.
Maybe I'm biased because I'm a dog person, but what's funny about this? Buttons takes the brunt of all the things that should have killed Mindy 10 times over because her parents are too irresponsible to make sure she's safe before they leave the house, or they could, not leave her alone, and at the end he gets scolded for something it looks like he did wrong.
That's not funny. That's heartless and cruel.
Do I even need to say that I don't think these segments could have carried a full series? I could barely take 5 minutes of watching this poor pooch suffer. 22 minutes is out of the question.
So this one is a bust. Next.
The Hip Hippos.
Darn it, another one of these already? Do I have to?
Hey, you said you were gonna go through all of them. Can't go skipping over characters now.
Alright, so here's the setup.
Maria and Flavio are two super wealthy hippopotami who decide they're sick of living in the jungle and move their house to the city where they live upper crust lives. Hilarious premise, isn't it? Obviously, a lot of the theoretical humor comes from how the hippos fancy themselves as aristocrats, as well as how out of touch they are with their surroundings. Not to mention also fat jokes. Lots and lots of fat jokes.
Yeah, as I'm sure you figured out by now, I never thought these characters were funny when they took center stage.
As supporting characters to the rest of the cast, they were fine, but they simply did not have enough material on their own to justify giving them the spotlight.
So no, I don't think a spin-off for them would have worked either. Next.
Katie Kaboom. This segment is set in a quaint little house in a quaint little suburb where a quaint little family lives. At least the father, mother, and son are quaint. The daughter, Katie, has issues. Being a teenage girl, she tends to overreact to every little problem she has, but she also has the unexplained ability to become a monster whenever she gets too emotional, which often results in destruction of property and the traumatization of her family. Fans have loved to speculate about where Katie's odd powers stem from, with the most popular theory being that the episodes each take place a month apart from each other, if you catch my drift.
So could it have worked as its own series? Honestly, I wonder if that was the plan all along.
It's no secret that the Warner Brothers executives wanted an animated sitcom to rival The Simpsons since the days of Tiny Toon Adventures, and their insistence on trying to force the idea into their pre-existing shows created many fierce battles behind the scenes. One infamous episode of Pinky and the Brain, entitled "You'll Never Eat Food Pellets in This Town Again," openly mocked the idea in the most blatant way imaginable and served as the resignation notice of that episode's writer.
So how does all of this relate to Katie Kaboom? Well, you see, Katie Kaboom was not originally part of Animaniacs.
The segments quite literally popped up out of nowhere, with 3 consecutive episodes prominently featuring this bizarre setup with no introduction or explanation of any kind. Then Katie Kaboom disappeared as quickly as she came.
I'm just speculating here, but this feels like a deliberate attempt to generate that animated sitcom. It has all the trappings you would expect with a unique, if somewhat misguided, central gimmick. Could it have worked as a series, though? Probably not.
The primary joke is that Katie's temper escalates quickly and simmers just as fast. Drawing that out over a half-hour episode would have killed that timing. Still, maybe it should have happened anyway.
If Katie Kaboom had become a series, it may have prevented Pinky, Elmira, and the Brain. Think about it.
Chicken Boo. Talk about a random premise. A 6-foot-tall chicken dons paper-thin disguises in an attempt to become part of the human world. He cannot talk, he is not really anthropomorphic, and there's little indication that he's smarter than any old chicken, but he somehow fools everyone. Except for one person per sketch that everyone else thinks is crazy.
The premise is bizarre, nonsensical, and was most likely conceived after a night of binge drinking, and yet it oddly works.
That being said, Chicken Boo would probably not have fared well as a full series, and the problem is Chicken Boo himself.
As mentioned time and time again, he's a chicken, I tell you, a giant chicken! But that's all he is.
Aside from his gargantuan size and apparent costume fetish, he is just a chicken. The comedy stems from everyone else around him, and he's just along for the ride. He's a passive protagonist, so it would have been difficult for him to carry a series on his own. Chicken Boo was tailor-made for 5-minute sketch comedy, and it was for the best that he remained there.
Maybe there is a way it could have worked, but I just don't know how sustainable it would have been.
Minerva Mink. No other character on Animaniacs left such a huge impact with hardly any screen time as Minerva Mink did.
She only got 2 segments all to herself and a handful of cameos elsewhere in the show, but a lot of people remember her all the same.
Minerva lives in the forest, and God has blessed her with a figure that would make most human women jealous. I mean, look at her!
I mean, she has got some attractive features. Long, flowing blonde hair, a skinny waist, reasonably sized childbearing hips, long, shapely legs that go all the way up, Large, supple... No, Omni viewer, stop! You shouldn't be thinking those things. She's not human. She's not even real. She's a cartoon mink. An absolutely gorgeous cartoon mink. Is it obvious that I'm single?
Anyway, Minerva has a difficult life. She really wants to fall in love and live happily ever after with a special somebody with rich parents, but her knockout looks mean that every guy in the whole stupid forest is drawn to her, difference in species be hanged. Thus, she must constantly dispose of would-be suitors. In typical Looney Tunes fashion, of course. Then again, when confronted with a hunky guy, she goes to pieces herself. Equality of the sexes, ladies and gentlemen. Unlike Katie Kaboom, Minerva was an original part of Animaniacs, even appearing in the opening theme. However, network executives demanded that her role in the series be limited because her segments were a bit too raunchy.
Hard to argue with that. Minerva's cartoons pushed the envelope right to the edge of the table.
I mean, look at this scene from an early episode of her wearing a barely closed bathrobe that...
What was I talking about? Right, so, much like Goodfeathers, if Minerva were to have gotten her own spin-off, it would have just had to embrace its risque side and pretty much gone into full sex farce mode.
I mean, that's what the segments were anyway, but giving it a primetime slot would have made it less likely to damage the children's fragile minds. Heck, it might even have made for a darn good animated sitcom, too. Alas, the world simply was not ready, and given her absence from the reboot, it apparently still isn't.
Well, that's where I stand anyway. If you have a different idea, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go run a freezing cold shower. Stupid sexy Minerva.
If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.